Lindsay Hawker was born on 30th of October 1984 in the United Kingdom. She was the middle child in a family blessed with 3 daughters. The Hawkers were a well-to-do, close-knit, and joyful family. Lindsay's parents were Bill and Julia. Her older sister was Louise, and the younger one was Lisa. From a young age, Lindsay had always been a kind-hearted, hard-working girl, always ready to lend a helping hand to others. In 2006, she excelled in her studies and graduated as the top student in biology from the University of Leeds. Life seemed incredibly bright and promising for Lindsay. Lindsay is an independent and adventurous young woman. Thus, she wishes to spend several years of her youth experiencing life in various countries around the world, before settling down to family life and stability. Consequently, after graduating from university, Lindsay has decided to move to Japan to teach English. Her boyfriend Ryan also plans to join her there a year later. A year on, Lindsay easily secured a position at Kwa School in Tokyo, one of the biggest private schools in Japan. It appeared that Lindsay quickly adapted to her new life. She lived with 2 female colleagues, also teachers at the school. Daily, she would cycle to the train station, catch the train to work, and return in the same manner. Lindsay regularly stayed in touch with her family back in the UK, sharing with them daily snapshots of her life in the Japanese culture. She was evidently very happy and content with her new life there. However, Lindsay's happiness was tragically short-lived. On the morning of 25th of March 2007, Lindsay said goodbye to her roommates and left the house with her teaching materials and bags, but she never returned. On the afternoon of 26th of March, Lindsay's parents received a distressing call from school, staff reporting Lindsay hadn't shown up for work for 2 consecutive days. It turned out her roommates had already contacted the police the previous night when Lindsay failed to return home, but for some unspecified reason, an investigation had not yet been initiated. The news sent the Hawker family into a state of panic. Lindsay's father hastily booked the earliest flight to Tokyo and got in touch with Ryan, Lindsay's boyfriend. Shocked by the news, Ryan was immediately reminded of the story Lindsay had shared with him 6 days earlier, on 20th March 2007. That day, as Lindsay was heading home by train, an unfamiliar man approached her, claiming to be one of her students. However, Lindsay, who remembered her students well, was sure this man was not one of them. Nevertheless, she courteously greeted him and looked away. For some reason, the man made her feel uneasy. She got off the train and cycled home as usual. But upon nearing her house, she accidentally looked back and realized the man was right behind her. The man caught up and explained he was planning to study abroad and wished to improve his English, asking if Lindsay could provide some private tutoring sessions. Despite feeling unnerved, Lindsay tried to stay calm, thinking maybe she was overreacting and perhaps he was merely a student seeking extra English lessons. By the time they reached Lindsay's apartment, the man claimed he was extremely thirsty and asked if he could come in for a drink of water and discuss the tutoring schedule. Lindsay hesitated, but knowing her roommates were home, she invited him in. After briefly greeting Lindsay's roommates, the man sat down with Lindsay in the living room. She agreed to teach him English at a cafe, considering it a safe public place for their sessions. While conversing, the man sketched a portrait of Lindsay and wrote down his name, phone number, and email address. This man was Tatsuya Ichihashi. Their first English lesson was scheduled for the 25th of March 2007 at a cafe near the train station. The previous day, Lindsay had messaged her boyfriend back in the UK, telling him not to worry about the man, who had followed her home, describing him merely as an oddball. They were to meet in a cafe, so she reassured him everything would be fine. Tragically, Lindsay was terribly mistaken. After receiving information, the police reviewed the cafe security footage and easily spotted Lindsay accompanying Ichihashi into the establishment. Lindsay appeared anxious and fidgety, continuously touching her hair. The two were observed studying together for about 50 minutes, during which Ichihashi seemed to be rummaging through various bags without finding what he was looking for. Around 10 a.m., they left and jointly hailed a taxi. By this time, the police had determined that Ichihashi was the last person seen with Lindsay. At 8 p.m. on March 26th, 9 officers arrived at Ichihashi's apartment, splitting into 2 groups. One remained on the ground floor while the other ascended to his 4th floor unit. However, upon opening the door, Ichihashi, to the police's astonishment, bolted from his apartment and slipped through their cordon. Barefoot and carrying a backpack, he sped down the emergency exit, eluding the officers. His swift escape meant that those on the fourth floor couldn't alert their colleagues below in time, allowing him to once again evade the waiting police by sprinting through the winding streets. Upon examining Ichihashi's apartment, the scene was chaotic, with women's belongings scattered throughout. A purse belonging to Lindsay was discovered in a corner, but that was not the worst of it. Stepping onto the balcony, the police uncovered a horrific sight. Ichihashi had moved a bathtub outside, filled with soil and sand from which a small pale hand protruded. It was Lindsay Hawker's corpse. Her naked body was removed from the bathtub, her mouth gagged with a scarf, and her limbs tightly bound with garden twine. Severe bruises covered her body, evidence of a prolonged savage attack. A large egg-sized bruise on her left cheek indicated repeated punches to the face, while other injuries suggested she had been kicked and fallen against furniture. Lindsay had been strangled to such an extent that her neck cartilage was crushed. Her head was shaved, and her hair was found in a plastic bag. At 3 a.m. on March 27th, Lindsay's parents received the most dreadful news imaginable. Their daughter's body had been found. The police then looked into Ichihashi's background, a 28-year-old living alone in a 3-bedroom apartment in Chiba, on the outskirts of Tokyo. His affluent parents, a dentist mother and a surgeon father, had purchased the apartment for him. Despite their success, Ichihashi was a disappointment, never securing a stable job and still dependent on his parents' monthly allowance. At 28, he lived in solitude, with a penchant for violent manga, and had previous arrests for stalking and assaulting women. At the time of the incident, Ichihashi had a long-distance girlfriend, meeting her only a few times a month. He was also rumored to have a fitness addiction, regularly attending the gym and jogging, which could explain his ability to pursue Lindsay on her bicycle home on March 20th. After their session on March 25th, Ichihashi pretended to have left his money at home, convincing Lindsay to share a taxi back to his place to retrieve it. Lindsay told the taxi driver to wait a few minutes while she accompanied Ichihashi to get the money. However, she did not return after 7 minutes, prompting the driver to leave. Wanted posters featuring Ichihashi's image flooded Tokyo. The murder news was broadcasted nationwide and internationally, with police urging the public to provide any information, no matter how insignificant, to apprehend the dangerous criminal. The investigation followed leads to red light districts, host clubs, and hotels, yet led nowhere. Months passed, and Ichihashi seemed to vanish into thin air. Meanwhile, fan clubs glorifying the twisted murderer emerged online, praising Ichihashi as a hero, an outlaw challenging the police and even labeling him as Japan's most handsome criminal. Yet unbeknownst to many, his familiar face was gone. Living incognito in Ibaraki, northwest of Tokyo, Ichihashi altered his appearance as his face plastered wanted posters everywhere. He frequently changed residences and disguised himself with glasses, fake hair, and a mask. Yet knowing this was insufficient, he took a drastic and bizarre step, performing surgery on his own face. Ichihashi purchased a first aid kit and removed a large mole on his left cheek before using scissors to trim and reduce his lower lip. Unable to complete this self-surgery in one go due to the pain, he did not abandon his plan. A few days later, he completed the self-operation in a public bathroom. He also attempted to narrow his nose using needle and thread, but found the procedure more challenging than modifying his lips. Realizing he needed professional help, he planned to undergo legitimate cosmetic surgery, but this required funds. Using the name, age, and address of a deceased man, he secured a job as a construction laborer in Osaka. Though Ichihashi's co-workers found him odd, they never suspected anything. While police were searching everywhere, Ichihashi worked steadily at the construction company for 13 months, saving approximately 1,000 yen. Eventually, he had enough money for a nose job, aiming for a longer and higher nose. The surgery was successful, yet Ichihashi remained unsatisfied. desiring a complete facial reconstruction. 2 years after the incident, on October 24, 2009, Ichihashi visited a cosmetic clinic in Nagoya for lip surgery and eyelid correction. While completing the paperwork, the clinic's staff noticed a large scar on his cheek, from where he had removed the mole. Suspicion arose when Ichihashi agreed to have his photo taken for before and after comparisons. The clinic staff recognized him as the national fugitive and immediately contacted the police. However, sensing their suspicion, Ichihashi abruptly quit his job and fled to Okinawa. This time, the police apprehended him at the ferry terminal. Realizing there was no escape, Ichihashi surrendered to the authorities. Ichihashi quickly confessed, revealing he had first seen Lindsay on the train and had secretly followed her for months before deciding to approach her on March 20th. After deceiving Lindsay to visit his apartment to retrieve tuition fees, he dragged her inside and raped her. Despite Lindsay's fierce resistance, she could not escape a tragic and painful fate. On July 11, 2011, Ichihashi was sentenced to life imprisonment. While incarcerated, he wrote a book titled "Until I Was Arrested," detailing the 2 years he spent evading the police and the extremes he went to in order to alter his appearance. The book sold over 100,000 copies, and Ichihashi expressed a wish to donate the proceeds to Lindsay's family, but they declined. The Hawker family stated they were grateful that the case was closed and justice served, but Lindsay was gone forever. After such loss and pain, all that remained was a hope for Lindsay's soul to find peace. Thanks for watching.